Now, we've invited our good friend Joshua Mercer, the communications director over at Catholic Vote, to discuss this story and also early voting. You know, the debate was aired after early voting had been started in Pennsylvania. And I think it would have been a great benefit to voters to have seen the debate because, hey, look, I don't want to knock the guy down. He suffered a stroke earlier in May, and he has, it seems, cognitive issues relating to the stroke. But if you watch the debate, it was really, I mean, it was hard to watch. Not only it was politicians talking, so they never answer the question, and just it goes everywhere. But when you really look into the responses from Mr. Fetterman, it's just they sometimes didn't really get to the point of the matter. So I think it would have been great to have the debate beforehand. But to speak about early voting, we've invited our good friend Joshua Mercer. Good morning to you, Joshua.
Hey, good to be with you. Yeah, actually, at least 9 million people, as many as 12 million people, have already voted in the midterm elections.
Wow.
Specifically in Pennsylvania, you have 635,000 people who have already voted, already casted ballots. Now, that's kind of why the debate over debates was raging all late summer, as you know, Dr. Oz wanted to have several debates. He wanted to make sure they were early, long before absentee voting happened. Some states have early voting. Some states just have no excuse absentee voting, which Pennsylvania, Michigan are like that. And so it seemed that the Fetterman campaign wanted to delay as long as possible that debate because they were, there was concerns that they would not do as well in the debate. So interestingly enough, they finally have this debate into, late October. Like I say, after, 600,000 people have already cast ballots in Pennsylvania. And the thing is, just trying to look at this objectively, I have my own concerns with Fetterman as a candidate on policy, but I just wanted to, for a moment, just simply examine, the case here that we're talking about, like a stroke. Now, my own father, had a stroke this year. Mm-hmm. And it can be very grueling. And my dad had initially had difficulty just communicating. Yeah. Like the way it works is sometimes is that you have the thought in your head, but it's like you're reaching to grab something off the shelf and the wrong word comes, and so you just kind of sometimes get this word salad going.
Yeah.
It can leave the person very frustrated, and I understand that. So with Fetterman, it seems like that was what was going on, where he was trying to articulate something and it just wasn't coming out right. And he gets up there and he starts out by the debate by saying good night, goodbye, and it was kind of a little left people a little flustered, like, wait, what? We just started this, and what happened is through the course of the debate, he just sounded like the answers he had. There was a lot of awkward pauses, and he just it's not like you say, sometimes politicians, both parties, of course, mm-hmm. they want to give the answer that, they oftentimes will avoid difficult questions or they'll misdirect and that kind of stuff. That's, sort of standard fare. But he was having a difficulty just, completing sentences, and he was thinking one thing and saying the other. And so, it really got to the point where, hey, why didn't we have this debate like 2 weeks earlier before, 600,000 people voted? You might have people now that say, wait a minute, now I want to reconsider what I did. Now they have to try to go back and say, I already sent in the ballot. Can I change? Because some states allow that. And that could even, that I think opens up a whole can of worms. So I think, I do think it's nice that, we allow absentee voting for people who, maybe they're traveling or maybe it's very difficult. They live in a nursing home and it's difficult to make it to in-person voting. I understand that. But by having complete no excuse voting, and because of the COVID pandemic, having so many votes cast by mail and cast early, you do have this situation where people might have buyer's remorse. It's possible that, a candidate could win, despite difficulty. I mean, the concern here is, of course, we're talking about not like city council. The United States Senate is a grueling job. It's a 6-year term. I mean, you're talking about, all the different things that a senator does, especially from a large state like Pennsylvania. I do think that there's, some valid concerns about this. I think the push to have early voting and so much absentee voting can have its drawbacks.
Yeah, definitely. And to speak again about the stroke, we're not. One of the things that was interesting, really, just the kind of way that our society functions these days. I mean, I saw the initial start of the debate as sort of a meme, and it was being shared around the internet. And so I saw it, and I thought, wow, this is odd. I wonder if he was serious, because he started off by saying good night. And I thought, wow, maybe he's just like nervous or something. Well, I think most people didn't understand or know that Mr. Fetterman had suffered that stroke. And I like that you brought that up, because, it really is. I mean, it's difficult to get the words out if you've had that sort of cognitive damage. My wife is a speech therapist, and in a clinical sense, when that happens, they oftentimes, like you were saying, you are thinking a word, but actually you're not able to say it, or something different comes out, which begs the question. Really.
Yeah, I mean, like in the case of my father, I mean, he's now months later, he's able to communicate a lot better, but he's still physically not able to drive. I mean, the doctors have said, you really shouldn't drive yet. I mean, and you're saying if I said to my father, like, okay, it looks like you've been doing the speech therapy well, the physical therapy's been going well, but the docs are like, you really shouldn't, drive a vehicle. And I thought to myself, if my dad was running for the United States Senate, I'd say, Dad, it's time to let someone else take your spot.
Yeah.
And I'm just surprised that didn't occur to someone. Earlier, about 2 weeks ago, there was a reporter. Her name was Dasha Burns. She's with the NBC. Okay. So NBC News is not considered by any means a conservative outlet.
Right.
And she was interviewing this same candidate who had the stroke, John Fetterman. And she said, it's pretty obvious in my conversations with him that he had trouble even understanding small talk. Just the kind of small talk, you kind of break the tension, like, hey, how's it going? How's your wave? How's this? That kind of small talk. It just wasn't clicking. And the only time he could really answer a question is when it would be typed out and it would appear on a screen, and it would take a minute or two, and it'd take a while before he get back to it. And she just thought, I think people deserve to know, just, in terms of the candidates, like, that this is what's going on, and he's having difficulty with this, And so what was the reaction, right? It's not just that she was attacked by a lot of liberals on Twitter, okay? I mean, that's, I suppose people are partisan or whatever. But it's that so many other reporters who claim to be mainstream reporters with mainstream outlets attacked the reporter. Like, how dare you let this out of the bag? That was basically what they were getting at. And like, oh, no, I don't know what she's talking about. This guy's fine. I talked to him for an hour and everything was perfectly fine. It's like, why is it that we're lying? Like, what is the purpose of this? So I don't think it's doing anybody any favors, But again, sometimes it looks like even members of the corporate media have their political favorites.
Oh yeah,
have the candidates they want the most, and they're gonna put their foot down on the scale.
Yeah, that's true.
Right, exactly. I've heard a lot of people talking about different things in regards to early voting. I've heard some people say things like, vote early because then they want to change the atmosphere of everyone, like, okay, the only people who only early vote are Democrats or people who are leftist. Therefore, if you're pro-life, you need to vote early. I've also heard the opposite of people saying, you vote at the last day, vote on election day, because then there's less likely that funny business can happen. And I'm like, where's the truth at in this? What's the good strategy, or does it not matter at all? Because I know I was concerned. I'm like, well, if I wait till election day, what if something comes up? What if I get a flat tire? Who knows what might happen? And then maybe I won't be able to vote. And so, what do you think is the big picture there?
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off a little bit there, but I guess there's, first of all, we have to make a distinction. I mean, some states like Florida have developed early voting, and they've been doing it for so many years now. And early voting is usually, what that means is you actually vote in person. You just do it early. Okay, so instead of doing it on election day of November 8th, you might be doing it. Like people in Florida can go vote right now in person. And so what you're seeing in terms of Florida is that a lot of the people who are mailing in ballots right now through the mail, are Democratic voters. They tend to be. I mean, I'm just giving it to you how it is. And then people who are Republican are voting in person. So my concern has always been chain of custody. Like if I cast my ballot by mail, I'm relying on the fact that the Postal Service is going to make sure it delivers it on time to where it needs to go, right? As opposed to early voting in person, you at least have that opportunity to know, okay, I know my ballot made it there. Now, of course, there are always going to be shenanigans or whatever, but it's less likely to have a problem if you vote in person. So early voting in person, I have less of a concern with. But again, I just don't think it should be 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time. I mean, that's what they're doing in Florida right now. I mean, I kind of wish it was a little bit closer to the election. Like if you just said, the 4 days before election, you could vote in person. I think that'd be better because then, everyone has an idea like, okay, we're settled on what's going on in the debates. We're settled on what the issues that we're talking about, and there's no October surprise. We've already had a chance to. Because that's what usually happens. October surprise when one of the candidates' campaigns or someone friendly with one of the candidates' campaigns throws some monkey in the wrench and they, some sort of, rhetorical grenade. I never knew about this candidate. And it gets really awkward with early voting, those kind of scandals that pop up. You have less of a chance to debate those. It's better to have an understanding of, okay, the election day is November 8th. You can vote for 4 or 5 days ahead of time. I'd much prefer that system than to have so many people vote by mail or even in person, weeks ahead of election day. Yeah. That's sort of my concern.
Yeah, and then you find a bunch of the ballots in a mail crate somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Well, picking up on that, Joshua, this is Brent Haynes. In the 2020 presidential election, there was an issue over mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. There were some legal issues that the Trump campaign and others tried to take to the U.S. Supreme Court where they didn't hear anything. There was an issue there where the court essentially said, or one of the justices said, we're sure they'll preserve the evidence. There was no order though to preserve the evidence, and then that evidence or the ballots, for example, the envelopes ballots came in, were destroyed, if I'm remembering that correctly. But my bigger point is this issue of mail-in ballots has been in the courts frequently in Pennsylvania, and just last week, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said they would hear a case filed by Republican groups over whether or not mail-in ballots that are not dated should be counted, even though Pennsylvania law says they should be dated, and even though there's a federal court that has ruled that the dating requirement is just a technicality and the votes have to be counted anyway, or you're violating federal civil rights voting laws. So
yeah, I mean, it gets kind of tough because the understanding is if they received the ballot before November 8th, before Election Day, then obviously it's arrived before election. The need for the requirement is so that you at least can have verifiable proof that was received beforehand. But if you obviously received it beforehand, but you can't really stamp a date on it or something like that. So there's a lot of these issues. I feel like, I do think, here's what's interesting. You have a lot of people that say there's a lot of critics of the Electoral College, right? This is the system we have right now for electing a president, which each state has a certain number of electoral votes based on population and the number of, the representation in Congress. And what that means is that all 50 states, plus Washington, D.C., get to run their own elections, right? Their own state elections. And it's ultimately the states that decide who gets elected president and who they decide to send to the Senate and to the House. If you decided to, let's say, get rid of the Electoral College, which a lot of times liberals are the ones calling for this, especially since 2 times in the last 20 some years we've already had Republican candidates that had fewer votes than the other ones that won because of the Electoral College system. I don't want to get into that too much, but the point is, if you got rid of that system, let's say, then it's like, well, wait a minute now. I need to know that there's voter integrity in Los Angeles. I need to know. Suddenly, I do care what's going on in Philadelphia, and I do care what's going on in Detroit and Miami. As opposed to if I just live in just Michigan, I care about Detroit, right? Because it's my state. But then you really need to say we need to have uniform laws. We need to have ballot integrity and all that kind of stuff. So you open up a big can of worms. it's hard. And when you have a continental power of 3,000 miles, like, it makes sense to have, rules that make sense for your state. So anyway.
Wasn't there a ruling in 2020 that ballots in Pennsylvania that arrived after the election had to be counted? And is that going to be an issue this year?
Right. I mean, because what they said was, if I think it was if on the envelope, the person signed it and dated it and before the election, and it was mailed and stamped before the election, even if it took a few days to receive it and it was after the election, it still had to be counted. Again, that's one of those things where, because there was this national emergency for COVID in 2020, states decided, election officials in states decided to just kind of go rogue. And they said, well, we'll allow these ballots if they were signed and dated, or even if they weren't dated, if it went into the mail before election day and received a few days after, it will still count it. Because they would, if it were this year, let's say, and it arrived November 9th, they wouldn't count it because, it was after election day. But they'd say, well, wait a minute, now it was mailed beforehand. So again, this is one of the concerns that with the COVID, they just decided to change their ways on this. And, in Michigan, they dropped strict requirements for signature verification. So it used to be they would look at the signature and say, well, let's look at against how this person voted last time and the signature that we have in file for their driver's license to make sure this is the right person signing it. And they just eliminated all those requirements, basically. So, that's the kind of, again, this is one of those things where if the signature verification, if they decide to lower their standards on it, say, okay, well, that's valid, then they put that ballot in the stack of ballots and they run it through the machine, they count it. And then if a few weeks later they say, well, wait a minute, should you have really counted that ballot? And like, well, whether we should have counted it or not, it's already in the file and it's already counted.
Joshua,
there's no going back.
We have about 3 minutes left in our conversation, and one thing that's really concerning me as I'm talking to a lot of really faithful Catholics, good people who are saying, and I sympathize with this position. They're saying, all the candidates are not good. The Republicans, the Democrats, they all support bad things, and so I'm just not going to vote because I don't want to participate in this system where I have to vote between the lesser of two evils. So I'm just not going to vote. What would you respond to people who make those claims? Because I know a lot of faithful Catholics who hold that position.
Well, listen, I mean, like, for example, in the case of Pennsylvania that we were talking about earlier, John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz, both candidates actually believe in the redefinition of marriage. I think I disagree with both of them. I think they're both very wrong on that issue. When it comes to abortion, one of them says it's sacred. The killing of innocent life, he considers that to be sacred, John Fetterman. Mehmet Oz is, kind of pro-life-ish. I mean, the thing is, I think the way people look at voting too often is sort of like the way we do social media. It becomes so very personal. And I kind of want to encourage Catholics to think of it in a different way, that it's really a corporal action. Okay. So, is it like I'm verifying and standing up for exactly what this person and everything he stands for, and I'm saying he's the best person ever, and I want him to be my babysitter, and I want him to, be the guy that I want to hire us for a job. I mean, and have him. It's like, hold on a second. What we're talking about here is, this person, can he perform the functions of the office, and does he agree with me on a majority of things, and can he? And I guess I just look at it as, will he do less evil? Will he, can I persuade him to try to do things better? So, if you look at this case, I guess they're both flawed candidates. Let's say, for example, in Pennsylvania, but it was one candidate says abortion is sacred, and the other candidate says, well, I'm mostly with you. I feel like if an issue comes down the pike and I want to talk to him, hey, should taxpayers have to pay for abortions? I know how one person's going to act no matter what. He says it's sacred, so
set in stone.
And the other candidate's like, well, I have at least the ability to try to persuade him closer to where I'm coming from. So, I'm not saying that, is this a perfect system? No, it's not a perfect system. I mean, it's like democracy is the worst system except for everything else. I mean, so that's what Churchill would say. So I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, I like to say it like, look, you have an election, coming up, you try to make a difference. Then after this election, you just, kick up your feet and don't do anything anymore? No. You call these congressmen, you call these senators,
and you
get involved in organizations like Catholic Vote. You read the Loop.
Let me just get you to talk about Catholic Vote, and you guys have a voting guide out right now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these swing states, we're just hearing the candidates on the issues. We're also just letting people know, we're sending out messages all the time, letting them know where the candidates stand. So go to CatholicVote.org and you can see a lot of this information.
Very good. CatholicVote.org. Thank you so much, Mr. Mercer, for joining us today on Catholic Drive Time. That's going to do it for this hour. After this short break, we're going to be right back. Don't go away. More Catholic Drive Time on the way.